Okay, it always seems impossible until it's done, and that is the moral of today's foreign feature, Cassandro, streaming on Prime Video. So briefly, Cassandro follows Saúl Armendáriz, an exotico wrestler from El Paso, Texas, who rises to international fame. The movie is directed by Roger Ross Williams, who was very much inspired when he met Cassandro in person and instantly fell in love with him. And he was fascinated by how he was able to dominate such a hyper-masculine space and garner the respect not only of his peers, but fans all around the world. And the first time he watched Cassandro perform, he was in tears. He couldn't believe that this was possible. And as a filmmaker, he prefers to make movies that are uplifting. And Cassandro's story was more than he could have ever dreamed of. So the movie stars Gael Garcia Bernal in the title role, and he's actually amassed such an impressive filmography. Like, this is a very heartwarming performance, and he's become such a seasoned actor. And you know, he's just one of those actors that can do anything. And this performance, I think, is one of the best. You know, it'll fly under the radar, unfortunately, but I don't think it should. And I really encourage you to go and take a look. It also randomly stars Bad Bunny in a role, and I have to say, like, he was weirdly charming. Even though you're hyper aware that he is Bad Bunny, it's a very good starting role, you know, like to start his career. Cassandro is an icon in Lucha Libre, which is a style of wrestling in Mexico. It is the second most popular sport next to soccer because it allows people to kind of escape the struggles of their daily life. Like, it's incredibly entertaining and dramatic, and it's just a pleasure to watch. So what makes Cassandro an icon is how he was able to turn the exotico wrestler into a world champion. So traditionally, exotico wrestlers were wrestlers with very feminine features. They were essentially caricatures of gay men. They were meant to be humiliated. They were the butt of the joke, sissies. They were not meant to be seen as actual opponents or true fighters. And exoticos can actually be traced back to the 1940s. And again, they were meant to be humiliated, right? Like, they were meant to just be laughed at. Lucha Libre is a physical theater that revolves around a good guy and a bad guy. And anybody who's watched wrestling, like, you already know. Like, my whole childhood was flashing before my eyes when I was watching this movie. Like, I think what I enjoyed about wrestling was the drama. Like, it wasn't so much the fighting. It was very dramatic. Even the fighting is dramatic. Like, watching people get tossed over chairs and like getting bashed with, like, it was just something else. But it was also the story, the investment in these characters. And on top of being a very physically demanding sport, the wrestler has the added burden of having to create these kind of superhero characters and then having to really play to the audience enough that they are invested and that they are kind of fully engaged in the show, right? It's like the drama behind it. Like, there's just so many parts, so many moving parts. And throughout his career, Cassandro actually had a number of injuries, number of surgeries, like near-death surgeries. Like, his body really took a beating. Again, it's a physically demanding sport. Like, you are getting tossed around left and right. Like, it is not something that the body can endure for a very long time. A part of the reason Cassandro was able to overcome prejudices and discrimination is because he was actually just a very good athlete. Like, he was one hell of a wrestler. And it's unfortunate because it took him so long to actually garner people's respect. At the start of his career, especially when he started building this persona, people did not want to fight with him. Not only that, they would actively attack him. He was stabbed multiple times. Like, it was really an uphill battle. And so at the start of his career, and we could see this in the movie, he played a masked wrestler by the name of El Topo, which again was supposed to be this kind of weak wrestler meant to be tossed around the ring and just for the audience's entertainment, right? To make the other wrestler look good. And so actually in real life, Cassandro played with many different characters, and one of them being Mr. Romano. And the person who helped him craft this persona was a man named Rey Mysterio. And if you remember Rey Mysterio, like, he was one of my favorite wrestlers. Like, as soon as I heard the name, again, I just had flashbacks. Like, you're gonna be watching this movie and you're like, oh my God, like, what a time to be alive. Like, he was just an icon in wrestling. And again, the crafting of these personas is so important because they get butts into seats, right? Like, you're going to root for your favorite superhero, your favorite character. And because the movie focuses on like Cassandro early in his career, we're watching him kind of build this persona, which is really fascinating, right? Like, there's a lot of trial and error. You're literally watching someone become who they're supposed to be, right? Like, sometimes we watch people like The Rock, or like these people that you're just like, oh, they were just like, it's so natural for us to think of them in this space, but we don't actually think about the work that goes into like, how did they actually craft, how do you get to that point, right? And it's a very, very, I imagine, like, just trial and error, right? A lot of missteps, a lot of just a mess. And I think one of the morals of this story, or one of the things that it communicates very well, is how sometimes you do have to play someone else to become who you are. So he kind of, as the movie goes on, he starts to refer to Cassandro as a real person, right? Someone who's confident, someone who, you know, demands respect, like basically everything that he's not, right? And I do think that sometimes creating an idealized version of ourselves can actually help us become that version, right? There's a difference between pretending to be someone you're not and kind of thinking, okay, like, who do I wish I was, right? Confident, I wish I was this, and kind of creating a person who is that, right? And then hoping that some of those traits rub off on you. And so he really needed this persona because at the start of his career, you know, he's kind of hiding in the shadows. He's having an affair with this married man with kids. And in real life, it went on from 18 to 30. Like, he really kind of was traumatized by it. And watching him, you know, with his partner, with his lover, just hiding in the shadows, someone who's clearly not comfortable with who he is, you know, it's a bit heartbreaking because Cassandro not only wants to be the best version of himself, he wants everybody else to be the best version of themselves, right? So it's really kind of breaking his heart that he doesn't have the means to do it yet. And so Cassandro slowly becomes the way. So in the movie, Cassandro lives with his mother, and this was actually one of the best parts of the movie because they have such a close bond. Like, they feel more like best friends than mother and son. And the father is actually not in the picture, and in real life his father actually abandoned him when he found out that he was gay. He just left the family, and so it's just the two of them. And his father was actually the one that introduced him to Lucha Libre. They would watch it together, and it was something that they bonded over, and that was quite heartbreaking because at the start of his career you can kind of see that as much as he loves it, the sport doesn't love him back, right? Like, they've kind of put him in a corner, they've typecast him, and that's just not who he is, right? And some part of him really believes that if he can become this champion wrestler, his father will accept him. And of course, there's a heartbreaking scene in the movie where his father just doesn't accept him. And that's kind of the process, right? Like, the decision to kind of accept yourself, you know, it might come at the expense of others. So watching him build Cassandro was really interesting because, again, the relationship between him and his mother is really important because it kind of shows the love and respect that he has for women. So in crafting this persona that was kind of inspired by telenovela, like figure skaters, like, he has so many inspirations and he's trying to kind of piece that all together. And again, an exotico wrestler, like, wrestling in general, like, you really have to create a persona that's larger than life. And you have to do so without it being a caricature. And that's really the struggle that he had. And one of the first things he decided to do was not wear a mask, right? Instead, he wore full makeup, full drag. And that's really to tell the audience, like, listen, you are seeing exactly what you think you're seeing, right? Like, the way you walk into the room, the way you kind of interact with the audience, like, everything has to be just larger than life. And it has to be so in a way where people have no choice but to root for you, or at least, worst case scenario, they want to see you again. At the start of his career, he was the only exotico doing this, right? Like, now it's become the norm, which is kind of crazy. But at the time, like, you know, he put butts in seats, right? Like, people wanted to see him. And one of the things that he was able to do so well is make sure that nobody kind of turned him into a freak show and nobody turned him into a caricature. Like, a part of the condition of him wrestling was that he had to win, right? Because again, it is a sport, but it's also like very much into storytelling, and exotico wrestlers are not meant to win, right? They're meant to just kind of be made fun of and tossed aside. But he said, no, listen, I need to win in order to get this respect. So the fact that he was able to kind of convince promoters and other wrestlers to kind of have that storyline to let him win was really important, because it not only garnered the respect of his peers, but also his audience alike, right? Like seeing someone that confident in themselves winning, it kind of makes other people want to be confident in themselves, right? And that's why he became an icon. But throughout the course of his career, he suffered with, drug addiction, suicide. Like, it was really like, the movie is very uplifting, but when you look into his life, it's actually very dark. And it's really just mind-blowing that he was able to overcome that. And now he helps other wrestlers. He puts on performances every week. Like, again, it seems impossible until it's done. And I think so much of life is just being bold enough to try. And in this case, the hardest thing to do is actually just try and be yourself. And so many of us wear masks, especially nowadays, right? Like, we hide our opinions because we don't want to get fired. We don't want to offend people. But all we're doing is making life incredibly difficult for ourselves. It's causing us to settle for relationships and people that are just not good for us, right? Like, he was in a relationship from 18 to 30, and that was just not good for him at all, because that's what he felt he deserved. It's a very simple, it's a very beautiful message, right? Like, don't wear a mask, be who you are. And as painful as it might be, not everyone is going to like it, but there's not much you can do about that. I think what was great about this film is, although he lost a lot of people close to him, like specifically his father, like he wouldn't accept him until the very end. He probably couldn't imagine how many more people he inspired, right? Like, sometimes we think we're the only ones going through what we're going through, but little do you know, you got like thousands and millions of people going through it, and just you being you could save lives, right? And sometimes we just have to take ourselves out of that bubble and really think big, right? Take the bigger picture into consideration. So overall, I just thought this was really heartwarming. I think Gael Garcia Bernal, again, he's just one of a kind. Bad Bunny, that was a lot, but good for him on getting this part. And so it's well worth a watch. It's on Prime. You guys let me know what you think, and until next time.